The bells of the Church of San Miguel were ringing loudly, marking the beginning of the annual Quorum-S. Maria adjusted her apron as she organized the tables of sweets that they would sell to raise funds. Her mother, increasingly weakened by the illness, watched her from a wheelchair with a smile that tried to hide her fatigue. "Maria, the children are impatient," shouted Louisa, her best friend, while pointing to a group of little ones who were fluttering around the play stand. Maria nodded quickly and hurried towards them, when suddenly a loud bang caught her attention. One of the event's decorative structures, a flower arch, was swaying dangerously. Without thinking twice, Maria ran, but before she could get there, a robust and agile figure appeared to restrain her. "Are you okay?" Javier asked, with his hand still firm on the structure. "Yes. Thank you, Javier," Mari responded, catching her breath. Javier was the town gardener, always reserved and with a look that seemed to hide untold stories. He had worked tirelessly for days to make the park look perfect, but no one expected him to get so involved in the event. Yet there he was, helping silently and asking for nothing in return. "You should be more careful with these things," Javier said, with a calm but firm voice. One afternoon, while supervising his students in the schoolyard, he saw Javier standing by the fence. In her hands, she held a small plant in a clay pot. "This is for you," he said, holding it out to her as she approached. "Because? Mar-a-a. For you and your mother," he said, leaving the food on the table without waiting for a response. Maria wanted to thank him, but something in his expression stopped her. It wasn't just his usual silence. There was a hint of melancholy in his eyes, as if carrying an invisible weight was part of his daily life. That night, while taking care of her mother, Mara couldn't stop thinking about Javier. Maria nodded quickly and hurried towards them, when suddenly a loud bang caught her attention. One of the event's decorative structures, a flower arch, was swaying dangerously. Without thinking twice, Maria ran, but before she could get there, a robust and agile figure appeared to restrain her. "Are you okay?" Javier asked, with his hand still firm on the structure. "Yes. Thank you, Javier," Mari responded, catching her breath. What was it that made him so enigmatic? "Looks like she impressed you," her mother commented with a mischievous smile. Mari, surprised, dropped the spoon with which she served the broth. "What are you talking about, Mom?" she asked, trying to sound indifferent, but her blush gave her away. "That boy, Javier. There's something special about it, don't you think?" Maria just laughed softly as she helped her mother get settled. However, her words stayed with her throughout the night. Was that what he felt? Or was it just curiosity? The next morning, while walking to school with books under his arm, he saw Javier in the square. He was pruning one of the bushes, concentrated, as if the world around him did not exist. Mari hesitated for a moment, but something inside urged her to approach. "Good morning, Javier," he greeted shyly. He looked up, surprised, but returned the greeting with a slight nod. "Thank you for yesterday. It was very generous of you to bring us food." Javier put down the pruning shears and looked directly at her, as if evaluating every word she said. "It was nothing. It's the least I could do." Maria noticed a change in his tone, warmer than last time. He decided to take a chance and ask, "Javier, why are you doing all this? You work harder than anyone else and never accept a thank you." He was slow to respond, as if choosing his words carefully. "Not everything is done for thanks. There are things that simply must be done." The answer left Maria more intrigued. Before she could say anything else, Javier returned to his work, leaving her alone with her thoughts. During the following days, Mare tried to focus on her classes, but every time she passed through the square, her gaze sought out Javier. Something about him attracted her, and not just because of his looks. There was a depth to his character that both disturbed and fascinated her. One afternoon, while supervising his students in the schoolyard, he saw Javier standing by the fence. In her hands, she held a small plant in a clay pot. "This is for you," he said, holding it out to her as she approached. "Because? My mother used to say it brings good luck. I thought maybe you would need it." Mare took the pot, moved by the gesture. "Thank you, Javier. It's very pretty." He nodded and without further words left. As she watched his figure walk away, Mara couldn't help but feel that, behind that facade of simplicity, there was a man full of secrets and emotions that she was just beginning to discover. That night, while she was planting the loquat in the small garden of her house, Mara realized that her curiosity about Javier was turning into something more. Days after receiving the loquat, Mara noticed that Javier continued to appear at unexpected times. One afternoon, while returning from the market, she found him carrying wood to an abandoned house near the square. Intrigued, she decided to approach. "Are you repairing that house?" he asked, leaning against the frame of the open door. Javier, with his sleeves rolled up and his face lightly covered in dust, turned to her. There was a man full of secrets and emotions that she was just beginning to discover. That night, while she was planting the loquat in the small garden of her house, Mara realized that her curiosity about Javier was turning into something more. Days after receiving the loquat, Mara noticed that Javier continued to appear at unexpected times. The walls, although worn, showed signs of having been carefully painted in the past. "Why are you doing this?" Maria insisted. Walking behind him, Javier let out a sigh as he began to nail some boards. "Let's say that this house has sentimental value for me. I don't want it to disappear." The answer did not completely satisfy Mare's curiosity, but she decided not to insist. Instead, he offered to help. "What do you need me to do?" asked. Javier looked up, surprised, but then nodded. "If you insist, you can hold this board while I fix it." They worked in silence for a while. Although the task was simple, Mare could not help but notice the skill and dedication with which Javier handled each tool. It was evident that he was no mere amateur. His movements were precise, like those of someone who had done this many times before. "You're very good at this. Where did you learn from?" he finally asked. Javier smiled, a rarity that briefly illuminated his face. "Let's say I had good teachers." The elusive answer left Maria with more questions, but before she could ask another, a loud clap of thunder echoed outside. The rain began to fall heavily, forcing them to stop. "Looks like you're stuck here for a while," Javier said as he dried his hands with a rag. Maria nodded, looking out the window as the water ran down the cobblestone streets. "Not a bad place to stay," he replied with a smile. Javier approached with a cup of coffee that he had prepared on a small improvised stove. "My mother used to say it brings good luck. I thought maybe you would need it." Mare took the pot, moved by the gesture. "Thank you, Javier. It's very pretty." He nodded and without further words left. As she watched his figure walk away, Mara couldn't help but feel that, behind that facade of simplicity, every word, every gesture, seemed to show that there was much more to Javier than anyone could imagine. When the rain finally stopped, Maria said goodbye, but not before promising to return to help in any way she could. As I walked back home, my hair still wet from the rain, I couldn't stop thinking about Javier and the strange magnetism I felt towards him. That night, as she looked at the small loquat tree planted in her garden, Maria realized that she was crossing a line. It was no longer just curiosity that drove her. It was something deeper, something I couldn't ignore, The morning sun illuminated the small square of San Miguel, while Mara organized her students' books in the classroom. Although she tried to concentrate on her tasks, her mind kept returning to the conversation she had had with Javier during the storm. There was something in the way he spoke, in the silences he left between his words, that disturbed her deeply. That afternoon, while walking through the square after class, she saw him again. Javier was sitting on a bench, staring at the horizon. In his hands, he held a yellow envelope, somewhat worn, that seemed to have been stored for years. Mara, driven by a mixture of curiosity and concern, decided to approach. "All good?" he asked softly. Javier looked up, surprised, but quickly put the envelope in his jacket pocket. His expression changed from relaxed to cautious in an instant. "Yes, of course." "Just thinking," he replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Mara sat next to him, without taking her eyes off him. Although he tried to maintain his composure, there was an obvious tension in his shoulders, as if the weight of the envelope was more emotional than physical. "You can trust me, you know," she said after a while, breaking the silence. Javier let out a slight sigh, but didn't say anything. Instead, he took out the envelope again and held it in his hands. "Sometimes past decisions haunt us, even when we think we've left everything behind," he murmured. Maria didn't know what to answer. There was sincerity in his words, but also a pain that he couldn't understand. At that moment, he wished he could relieve it somehow, even though he knew it wouldn't be easy. "Do you want to talk about it?" he finally asked. Javier shook his head and stood up from the bench. Before Maria could stop him, he was already walking towards her house. During the following days, Mara tried to continue with her normal life, but the image of Javier and the yellow envelope continued to haunt her mind. What could be so important to worry him like that? And why did she feel like her connection with him grew deeper with each interaction? One afternoon, while Mara was taking care of the loquat tree in her garden, she heard a noise at the door. When she opened it, she found Javier, who was holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "These are for your mother," he said, handing them to her with a small smile. Mara invited him in, and Javier accepted, although with obvious nervousness. While sharing a coffee, they began to talk about lighter topics. For the first time, Mara saw him laugh, a genuine laugh that lit up his face, and made her feel like they were breaking the barriers that separated them. "No," Javier said suddenly, looking directly into her eyes. "Sometimes I think I should never have come here, but then there are moments like this that make me wonder, why do you say that?" Mara asked, intrigued. Javier hesitated, but before he could respond, Maria's mother's voice interrupted from the living room. "Javier, son, come say hello to me." The naturalness with which she called him son surprised both of them, but Javier didn't feel uncomfortable. He stood up and walked towards her, leaving Maria alone with her thoughts. What did all this mean? And what role would he play in her life? That night, as she looked at the stars from her window, Mara couldn't help but wonder if she was ready to face the secrets Javier seemed to be hiding. More importantly, was she ready to open her own heart to what she was beginning to feel about him? The sound of birds at dawn filled the air, but in Maria's small house, the atmosphere was tense. Since Javier's visit the night before, he had not stopped thinking about the words that remained suspended between them. His mother, however, seemed delighted with the attention that Javier gave them. "He is a good man, Mara. You can tell he carries a burden, but who doesn't?" he said while Mara served him breakfast. Maria nodded distractedly. Could he really trust someone whose past remained a mystery? The connection she felt with Javier was undeniable, but it was also terrifying. Just when she was lost in thought, One of her students, Anna, came running with a paper in her hand. "Miss Maria, look what I found in the park," exclaimed the girl. Maria took the paper and noticed that it was a page torn from an old newspaper. His heart stopped for a moment when he read the headline, "Businessman disappears after financial scandal." Next to the article there was a blurry photo, but the face was unmistakable. "Javier, where did you get this from, Anna?" he asked, trying to remain calm. He was lying near the flowers. "I thought it was important," the girl responded before running away. Mare kept the clipping in her bag and decided to confront Javier. "I knew I couldn't continue building a relationship with someone without knowing their truth." That afternoon, she found him working on the house he was repairing. Her face was calm, as always, but Maria noticed a slight change in her posture when she saw her approach. "We need to talk," she said bluntly. Javier stopped and stared at her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. Mare took out the clipping and showed it to him. "Is this true? It's you?" Javier took the paper and looked at it in silence for a long moment. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh and sat on the edge of a makeshift staircase. "Yes, it's me," he admitted in a low, almost inaudible voice. "But it's not the whole story." Maria crossed her arms, waiting for an explanation. Javier said suddenly, looking directly into her eyes, "Sometimes I think I should never have come here. But then, there are moments like this that make me wonder, why do you say that?" Mare asked, intrigued. Javier hesitated, but before he could respond, Maria's mother's voice interrupted from the living room. "Javier, son, come." Maria listened to him silently, processing each word. Although his story seemed sincere, I couldn't ignore the possibility that there was more than what he was revealing. "And now, what are you looking for here, Javier?" he finally asked. "Peace," he answered without hesitation. "I want to rebuild my life away from everything that destroyed me. I want to find something real, something worthwhile." Maria felt a pang in her heart at his response. Although she still had doubts, she also saw the vulnerability in him, the internal struggle he was facing. But in that moment, under the clear sky and with the future uncertain, they found comfort in each other. It was a start, and that was enough. The following days passed with apparent calm. Mare and Javier began to spend more time together, sharing small moments that seemed to build a stronger connection. Although they both knew that Javier's past was a sensitive topic, they decided to put it aside for a while, concentrating on enjoying the present. One afternoon, while they were walking through the town market, Javier bought a small bouquet of flowers for Mare's mother. It was clear that Javier was much more than just a gardener, but was she willing to risk her heart for someone with such a complicated past? Dawn brought with it a restlessness that Maria could not shake. After Javier's confession, she felt trapped in a storm of emotions. Maria, for her part, shared the sacrifices she had made to care for her mother and keep her job. As they reached the top of the hill, the landscape before them seemed to symbolize something greater. It was a reminder that, although the road there had been difficult, there was always something beautiful waiting for them at the end. He decided to take the afternoon off and walk towards the hills near the town, a place where he had always found clarity. However, he did not expect to meet Javier on the same road, carrying a bag of dirt for his repairs. "Maria," he said when he saw her, stopping immediately. "I didn't think you'd come here." She stood still for a moment before answering. "I needed to clear my mind. But I always seem to find you, even when I don't plan to." Javier put the bag aside and approached slowly, keeping a safe distance. There was something different about him. His posture was more relaxed, as if he had accepted that she had every right to question him. "If you need space, I understand," he said quietly. "But I want you to know that I don't regret telling you the truth." Maria looked at him, searching his face for signs of doubt, but all she found was sincerity. "It's not easy, Javier. I feel like every time I try to get to know you, Something else appears that complicates everything. Javier nodded, looking at the ground. I know. I'm not the simplest man, and my past is something that will probably always be with me. But what I feel for you is the only thing that makes me want to stay here, to move forward. Javier's words made Mara's heart beat faster. There was honesty in his voice, and although part of her wanted to walk away, another part longed to trust him. But the doubt continued to loom. What if your past catches up with us, Javier? He finally asked. What would we do then? Javier looked up, his gaze firm and determined. We would fight. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise that I wouldn't run away again. The conviction in his words left Maria without a response. For the first time, he saw Javier not as a man fleeing from his past, but as someone willing to confront him for something he considered important. For her, they decided to walk the path together, silent at first, but little by little, the words began to flow. Javier told him about his days as a businessman, about how he had lost the people he loved by focusing on money. Maria, for her part, shared the sacrifices she had made to care for her mother and keep her job. As they reached the top of the hill, the landscape before them seemed to symbolize something greater. It was a reminder that, although the road there had been difficult, there was always something beautiful waiting for them at the end. I want to try it, Javier, Mara said suddenly, breaking the silence. Javier looked at her, surprised, but his lips curved into a smile that he couldn't hide. Me too, Maria. For the first time in a long time, I feel like it's worth a try. They both knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But in that moment, under the clear sky and with the future uncertain, they found comfort in each other. It was a start, and that was enough. The following days passed with apparent calm. Mara and Javier began to spend more time together, sharing small moments that seemed to build a stronger connection. Although they both knew that Javier's past was a sensitive topic, they decided to put it aside for a while, concentrating on enjoying the present. One afternoon, while they were walking through the town market, Javier bought a small bouquet. The gesture, although simple, melted one of the last barriers that Mara still maintained in her heart. However, that same day, something unexpected happened. As they headed towards the square, a man dressed in a dark suit appeared in the crowd. After all, he had built his life in the town, escaping everything that Miguel represented. I can't keep running away, Mara. But I don't want to drag you into this either, he responded, his voice thick with emotion. You and your mother are the only good thing I've had in years. I can't let him hurt them. Mara took his hand, a gesture that surprised Javier. Her fingers were warm, firm, conveying a security he didn't know he needed. We are in this together, Javier. I'm not going to let you face everything alone. If you say you are ready to fight, I will be with you. Long time no see, he said with a tone that mixed irony and threat. Mara looked at Javier, waiting for an explanation, but he simply took a step forward. Miguel, I didn't think you'd come here, Javier responded, his jaw tense. I had to see you. There are issues that cannot be resolved just by disappearing, Miguel replied, casting a meaningful look. Maria felt that the tension between the two men was palpable. Although he didn't fully understand the situation, he could sense that Miguel represented something that Javier had been avoiding. This is not something we should discuss here, Javier said, with a tone that sought to remain calm. You're right. But don't think that you can continue hiding forever, Miguel responded before walking away, leaving Mara and Javier in an uncomfortable silence. When Miguel disappeared into the crowd, Mara took Javier by the arm. I need to know what's happening, Javier. I can't go on without understanding what I'm getting involved in, he nodded. Knowing it was time to be completely honest, Miguel was one of my partners when I had the company. It was he who betrayed me, who manipulated things so that I would bear the blame for the scandal. I don't know why he's here now, but I don't think it's a coincidence. Mare felt a mixture of anger and helplessness upon hearing his confession. On the one hand, he wanted to protect him, but on the other, he knew that Javier's past was a threat they couldn't ignore. Do you think he plans to do something? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I don't know, but I can't let this affect you or your mother. If I have to face him, I will do it alone. Don't say that. You're not alone in this, Maria responded firmly. Although Mare's words moved him, Javier knew that the danger was real. For the first time since he had arrived in town, he began to doubt whether staying was the right decision. However, as he looked at Maria, he knew that walking away from her would be even more painful than facing any threat. That night, as Maria sat next to her mother, her thoughts were filled with uncertainty. She knew she loved Javier, but she also knew that loving someone with such a complicated past meant facing dangers she had never imagined. For his part, Javier spent hours looking at the yellow envelope he had kept for so long. He knew that the decision he made in the coming days would change his life, and Maria's forever. The night fell on San Miguel with a tranquility that contrasted with Javier's emotions. Sitting in the house under repair, he held the yellow envelope in his hands. He had kept the document as a reminder of his past, an anchor that kept him from forgetting everything he had lost. However, now, with Maria in his life, everything seemed more complicated. Suddenly, a soft knock on the door brought him out of his thoughts. When he opened it, he found Mare, wrapped in a scarf to protect herself from the cold night air. I couldn't sleep, she confessed, with a mixture of concern and tenderness in her eyes. I felt like I needed to see you. Javier gestured for him to enter. As Maria settled into an old couch, she noticed the envelope on the table. Although he didn't mention it, his presence seemed to weigh on the atmosphere. What will you do now? He finally asked, breaking the silence. Javier looked at her, searching for words that wouldn't scare her. But that wouldn't hide the truth either. Miguel is not someone who stops easily. If he's here, it means he has a plan. But I don't know what he wants. And you? Mare insisted. Are you going to face it? Or are you going to run away again? The question was direct, and Javier felt his heart shrink. He couldn't blame her for doubting him. After all, he had built his life in the town, escaping everything that Miguel represented. I can't keep running away, Mare. But I don't want to drag you into this either, he responded, his voice thick with emotion. You and your mother are the only good thing I've had in years. I can't let him hurt them. Mare took his hand, a gesture that surprised. The weight of his words touched something deep in Javier. For years, he had carried his guilt and pain alone, but for the first time, he felt like he wasn't completely lost. Mary was not only an anchor for him, it was his hope. Thank you, he murmured, gently squeezing her hand. I don't know if I deserve this, but I promise not to let you down. The conversation stopped for a moment, and Maria looked around the house. Although it was still under construction, there was a certain charm in the details that Javier had restored. Why this house? She asked, curious. Javier smiled. A strange but sincere gesture. It was my grandmother's. She was the one who taught me that honest work is worth more than all the money in the world. I wanted to restore it as a tribute to her, and also as a way to prove to myself that I can build something that isn't based on money. Maria felt like she understood him more deeply at that moment. Javier was not only a man escaping his past. He was someone looking to redeem himself, to rebuild his life from the ground up. So what's next? Asked. Javier took a deep breath before answering. I'll talk to Miguel. I don't know what you're looking for, but I can't let this continue to be a shadow in our lives. I'll be here when you come back, Maria said, with a firmness that brooked no doubt. That night, when Maria returned home, she felt that something had changed between them. Javier was no longer just an enigmatic man. He was someone who was willing to fight for what he loved. For his part, Javier, looking at the yellow envelope one last time, made a decision. He would face his past, regardless of the consequences. The day dawned with an air of palpable tension. Javier, with the yellow envelope in his jacket pocket, walked towards the central square. I knew I would find Miguel there. Memories of his old life, mixed with fear and determination, weighed on him. But this time, he was not willing to give in. Mara watched him from a distance with her mother. Although Javier had insisted on facing Miguel alone, she couldn't help but worry. Something in his eyes that morning had promised that he would do everything possible to protect her, even at the cost of his own safety. Javier arrived at the agreed-upon location and found Miguel waiting for him, leaning against a column. The man received him with a sardonic smile, as if he enjoyed his restlessness. "I didn't think you'd come so soon," Miguel said, crossing his arms. "I figured you'd run away again." "I'm not here to run, Miguel. I want to know what you're looking for," Javier responded firmly. Miguel laughed, but his eyes did not reflect humor. "What I always looked for, Javier, what belongs to me. I know you saved important documents before you disappeared. Papers that could ruin me if they fell into the wrong hands." Javier narrowed his eyes. He had suspected that Miguel had not come to town by chance, but hearing the confirmation infuriated him. "I never kept anything to use against you. All I did was escape the life you destroyed," Javier said, in a tone that barely concealed his rage. "And that seems enough to you," Miguel replied, getting dangerously close. "Do you think you can start over while I continue to risk everything?" Javier took a step back, but maintained his composure. "I'm not interested in destroying you, Miguel. I just want you to leave me alone." Miguel stared at him, evaluating him. For a moment, the silence between them was so intense that even the sounds of the market seemed to fade away. "If that's true, give me what you have. And maybe, just maybe, I can leave you alone," Miguel said with a bitter smile. Javier reached into his pocket and took out the envelope. He held it for a moment, as if weighing the price of his decision. Finally, he extended his arm toward Miguel. "Here it is. I never wanted trouble, but this doesn't mean I trust you." Miguel took the envelope with a triumphant expression and quickly put it away. Before leaving, he leaned towards Javier. "You're weaker than I remembered, but at least you have good judgment. Take care of your girlfriend, Javier. This is no place for people like her to mix with you." Javier clenched his fists as he watched Miguel disappear into the crowd. His body was tense, but his mind could only think of Maria. He had done this for her, for the peaceful life he wanted to build together. Javier, with the yellow envelope in his jacket pocket, walked towards the central square. I knew I would find Miguel there. Memories of his old life, mixed with fear and determination, weighed on him. But this time, he was not willing to give in. Mara watched him from a distance with her mother. Although Javier had insisted on facing Miguel alone, she couldn't help but worry. "Whatever happens, you are not alone," Maria said, with a voice that was firm and soft at the same time. Javier nodded, taking courage, and finally knocked. The sound of footsteps on the other side made him catch his breath. When the door opened, a woman appeared. Although her face was marked by years and difficulties, Javier recognized her immediately. "Elena," he whispered. Elena looked at him with a mixture of surprise and distrust. For a moment, time seemed to stop between them. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice full of dismay. Although Maria tried to be by his side, she could feel the weight he carried. One afternoon, while they were walking together to the market, Mare decided to break the silence. "Javier, I know you told me it's over, but it doesn't seem like you really feel that way. What is happening?" he asked with a mixture of concern and tenderness. Javier stopped, turning to her. There was something different in his gaze, as if he were about to confess something he had kept hidden for too long. "There is something I haven't told you, Mare. Something that could change everything you think about me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Maria took his hand, urging him to continue. "Then tell me, Javier. I don't want you to continue carrying this alone." Javier took a deep breath before beginning. "When everything fell apart in the company, I not only lost my reputation, I also lost someone who was important to me, my sister. She trusted me, and when the scandal broke, I couldn't protect her. Miguel used that against me, and I have lived with the guilt ever since." Mare felt her heart shrink at the confession. Although she had imagined that Javier's past was complicated, she was not prepared for the depth of his pain. "What happened to him?" he asked softly. She moved away from me. She didn't want to listen to my explanations and left with Miguel, believing that I had betrayed her. "I haven't heard from her since then," Javier responded, his voice breaking. Maria hugged him, feeling his pain spill into her chest. For the first time, Javier allowed himself to show all his vulnerability, dropping the facade he had built to protect himself. "You don't have to face everything alone, Javier. If she's out there, we can look for her together. Maybe there's still a chance to fix things. What if he doesn't forgive me? What if I'm wrong again?" Javier asked, clinging to her as if she were his only anchor. "The important thing is that you try. No matter what happens, I will be with you." That night, as Mara sat with her mother for dinner, she couldn't stop thinking about the depth of the bond she was building with Javier. She knew that loving him meant accepting his shadows and his lights, and she was willing to face any challenge with him. For his part, Javier spent hours in the house being repaired, reflecting on what Mara had told him. He knew that looking for his sister was a risk, but he also knew that he couldn't continue running from his past. If he wanted to build a future with Mare, he had to first face the ghosts that tormented him. The next day, Javier made a decision. He gathered all the courage he had and went to look for Maria. "I'm going to look for my sister," he told her with determination. "I don't know if he'll forgive me, but I can't move on without trying." Maria nodded with a smile that reflected pride and love. "I will be with you every step, Javier. No matter what happens, you are not alone." Mare's commitment gave Javier the strength he needed. Together, they prepared for what was to come, knowing that although the road would be difficult, their love was the foundation that would sustain them in the face of any adversity. The morning was gray, as if the sky reflected the mix of emotions in Javier's heart. Together with Mare, he began the journey to the city where his sister, Elena, had been last seen according to information he had obtained from old contacts. During the ride, they barely spoke, but Mara kept her hand on Javier's, giving him the silent support he so needed. When they arrived at the indicated address, Javier felt his breathing become heavy. It was a small, run-down apartment building, a far cry from the luxury they had once been accustomed to. As they climbed the stairs, each step echoed their guilt. Upon reaching the door, Javier raised his hand to knock, but immediately lowered it, hesitating. "I'm with you, Javier. Whatever happens, you are not alone," Maria said, with a voice that was firm and soft at the same time. Javier nodded, taking courage, and finally knocked. The sound of footsteps on the other side made him catch his breath. When the door opened, a woman appeared. Although her face, "I needed to explain to you what happened. Tell you the truth," Javier responded, taking a step towards her. Elena raised a hand, stopping him. "The truth. It's been years, Javier. You let everyone think you were the culprit, and disappeared. "Why now?" she said, with a tone that oscillated between reproach and sadness. Mare watched the scene from the side, wanting to intervene, but knowing that this moment belonged to them. Javier took a deep breath and began to speak. "Elena, I know I made mistakes. I know I wasn't the brother you needed, but I never betrayed you. Miguel was the one who manipulated everything. He used it to confront us, and I didn't know how to fix it." Without saying more, he hugged her tightly, as if that gesture sealed the beginning of a new stage in their lives. Over time, the house that Javier was repairing became his home. Together, they worked to transform that place into a symbol of their love and their ability to overcome adversity. Javier and Mare sat on a small sofa while Elena served coffee. The silence was dense, but not hostile. "So what do you want?" Elena finally asked, sitting down in front of them. "I want to fix things with you. I don't know if you can forgive me, but I want you to know that I have always regretted how things ended between us," Javier said, his voice breaking. Elena watched him for a moment before answering. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Javier. They were difficult years, and I felt so alone." Javier and Mare sat on a small sofa while Elena served coffee. The silence was dense, but not hostile. "So what do you want?" Elena finally asked, sitting down in front of them. "I want to fix things with you. I don't know if you can forgive me, but I want you to know that I have always regretted how things ended between us," Javier said, his voice breaking. Elena watched him for a moment before answering. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Javier. They were difficult years, and I felt so alone. Without you, I wouldn't have had the courage to face Elena or accept the things I left undone for so long." Maria smiled softly, but shook her head. "You don't have to thank me, Javier. What you did was for you, for your family, and I am proud that you took that step. I was only here to remind you that you are not alone." Javier took a deep breath, as if he was preparing to say something he had kept for a long time. "Mare, when I arrived in this town, I thought my life was over." Mare, at his side, maintained a serene expression, as if she understood that her silent support was all Javier needed at that moment. When they arrived in town, the calm family atmosphere of San Miguel seemed to contrast to the tensions they had faced in the city. However, Javier knew that there were still unfinished business, especially with Mare. She had been by his side unconditionally, and it was time to fully open her heart to him. That night, under the starry sky in the patio of the house he was still repairing, Javier took Mare's hand and looked directly into her eyes. "Maria, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me. Without you, I wouldn't have had the courage to face Elena or accept the things I left undone for so long." Maria smiled softly, but shook her head. "You don't have to thank me, Javier. What you did was for you, for your family, and I am proud that you took that step. I was only here to remind you that you are not alone." Javier took a deep breath, as if he was preparing to say something he had kept for a long time. "Mare, when I arrived in this town, I thought my life was over." Although she had felt love for Javier for a long time, hearing him say it so clearly was something she had not anticipated. "Javier, I can't imagine my life without you. I love you with everything you are, with your past and your present. And yes, I want to be with you, face whatever comes, and build that future together." Mare's words filled Javier with a happiness that he did not remember having felt in years. Although she had felt love for Javier for a long time, hearing him say it so clearly was something she had not anticipated. "Javier, I can't imagine my life without you. I love you with everything you are, with your past and your present. And yes, I want to be with you, face whatever comes, and build that future together." Mare's words filled Javier with a happiness that he did not remember having felt in years. Without saying more, he hugged her tightly, as if that gesture sealed the beginning of a new stage in their lives. Over time, the house that Javier was repairing became his home. Together, they worked to transform that place into a symbol of their love and their ability to overcome adversity. Mara continued teaching, while Javier found his purpose helping others in the town. Using his knowledge to support those who needed it most, Elena, although still distant, began sending letters to Javier, showing that the wounds of the past were slowly beginning to heal. And although Miguel never showed up again, Javier knew he was no longer afraid to confront him if he ever did. Under the starry sky of San Miguel, in a small but loving town, Javier and Mare began their new life together. Because in the end, money, power, or past losses didn't matter. The only thing that really mattered was the love they shared and the promise of a future built with sincerity and hope. The story of Javier and Mare teaches us that the true value of life does not lie in money or the past, but in the strength of love and redemption. Facing our fears and building a future with those we love is the greatest act of courage. What did you think of this story? We want to know your opinion. Leave us a comment and share how love has transformed your life. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart. Now, get ready to live another unforgettable experience. Click on the final screen and discover a new story full of emotion and hope. Don't miss it.